Welcome to the 29th Annual Elizabeth Bennett Reading. The Bennett Faculty Writing Grant was established in 1984, and the reading event was added in 1994. The fund is given annually to a faculty member to fund a 2-year writing project. The recipients demonstrate reverence for the written word and seek to share that passion with students and colleagues. Candidates are selected through an application process that includes detailed plans for their process and samples of their writing. Tonight, we celebrate and share in the work of Dr. Elizabeth Ryan as she completes her 2nd year of the grant, and from first-year recipient, Audrey Bourriaud. I worked really hard to make sure I pronounced the last name right.
It was perfect. No.
Oh, thank you, Audrey. Miss Bennett, for whom the grant is named, is remembered by her students as having an intense and devoted interest in the use of the English language, and for her remarkable ability to inspire a precise and disciplined use of words in the written expression of thoughts and ideas. And she really loved poetry. Many of her former students went on to pursue careers in writing, and a number of them became English teachers themselves. According to former student Carol Faulkner Peck, class of 53, quote, Miss Bennett brought to our eyes and ears the best of English literature, awakening our love for the richness and diversity of words and showing us the importance of accuracy and detail in our writing. The light in her room did not all come through the windows or from the ceiling, end of quote. So decades later, we pay tribute to Miss Bennett, an inspiring teacher who helped set a foundation of care and dedication to the written word that still resonates through our school today. Our students go on to amazing careers in a wide range of fields, and so often writing is at the core of their success. We also are grateful for her former students who chose to honor her by establishing the Elizabeth Bennett Writing Grant. We thank Caroline Cross Chinland and Annie Sanders from the Kingswood class of 1958, Leslie Shimke Johnson, class of 64, and Karen Hegenlocker, class of 81, for their work on the grant, and to the many friends of the Bennett for their contributions to the fund that has nurtured our faculty writers and made this evening possible. Coming together as a community to celebrate and share in the talents of our colleagues is an important touchstone for us in the fall. It's a chance to celebrate our readers who serve as an inspiration for all of us to share ourselves in new ways with one another. Doing a public reading of one's work, by all accounts, is both thrilling and overwhelming. Some of you here tonight know this firsthand. We often have former Bennett recipients in the audience, and so if you are in this space with us tonight celebrating, and you are a former recipient of the Bennett Writing Grant, would you please stand? Yay! It is clear that tonight's readers are in good company. Dr. Elizabeth Ryan. Tonight, we begin our readings with the 2nd-year grant recipient, Dr. Ryan. History Department Chair Chip Wiswall notes that she is a creative and energetic member of the team and inspires her students with her very own passion of her subject matter. It was no surprise then that her deep dive into primary sources last summer inspired her History of Feminist Thought class to research and create a timeline of the history of feminism at Cranbrook schools. The student work culminated in a museum-quality exhibit the class brought to life in the STEAM lab, which is now installed in the lower level of Kingswood. Next time you're at Kingswood, be sure to take some time for a walk down the hall outside the history workroom where it is installed. It is a great example of what becomes possible when our passionate teachers inspire and empower their students. Last summer, Dr. Ryan's work focused on work with primary sources, trying to figure out what the elusive term Bachelor Mother meant in the context of the 20th century. Building on that research, she spent this past summer fitting Bachelor Mothers into the larger context of 2 trends of that century, both connected but unique: the rise of independent womanhood and the rise of single motherhood. The findings of her summer research help bridge the gap between 2 major trends in women's history and will ultimately lead to an article for publication. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Elizabeth Ryan to the podium.
All right. Welcome, welcome. Thank you for that lovely introduction, Mrs. Doherty. I will say, even though I'm a historian and my writing is history, and you were talking about Elizabeth Bennett, whom I never met, I started loving writing and reading because of my high school English teacher, and I actually still write to her. We write letters back and forth, like actual snail mail, once or twice a year, and I always look forward to seeing her slanted handwriting, catching me up or asking me for gossip about my classmates. So it's something that stays with you. Here we go. I prepared, as kind of as last time, a more like a conference style presentation for you, since just reading an excerpt from a random part of a history article might not be the most fun. So I'll just start with this PowerPoint about where I picked up since last we met. Last year I introduced the topic of Bachelor Mothers to you all, or if you were here. If you forgot or you weren't here, I will briefly recap. I came across the term Bachelor Mothers in an article from New York Magazine in 1969, at the top left there, and it described single unwed women who were choosing to become mothers. And the reason this piqued my curiosity was because at that point, everything I had studied about unwed mothers told me that single mothers by choice didn't really happen until the 1980s. Furthermore, it appeared that these bachelor mothers were white middle-class women, and the trend in the 1950s and 60s was for unwed white mothers to actually give up their babies for adoption, not to keep them. And needless to say, this article stunned me. I was surprised that it even existed. However, as often happens when you're writing your dissertation, you can't follow every lead, and I had to abandon the bachelor mothers until last summer. The big takeaway for me about bachelor motherhood, as I've dived into the research, is that bachelor motherhood and motherhood in general is about choice. The questions I keep coming across: are women able to make their own choices about if and when they become mothers? Does there continue to be a mandate for women to become mothers? Is motherhood the definition of womanhood? How do we as a society support motherhood and parenthood more generally? That was one of the takeaways from my dissertation, was that it's actually really about parenthood. The research topic has been timely, to say the least. In the news and on social media, I have been barraged by related topics, making me think even more deeply about the history of motherhood and helping me make connections. For example, one article I read, down in the lower left, there's an image from it. One article I read described how the majority of in vitro clients last year were single mothers by choice, unmarried women choosing to have a baby on their own. And you might think, sure, that seems pretty normal now. What's wrong with that? And in fact, I have a friend who went this route, and she couldn't be happier, but a mutual acquaintance of ours who found out about this choice, the person didn't hesitate to say to me, but that's not right, a baby needs a father. And this was in 2023. So these topics continue to come up. They're still out there. Of course, IVF and artificial insemination are quite expensive. The cost limits who can afford to become single mothers by choice. But you may have seen this trend on TikTok in the past year, where women are sharing DIY artificial insemination tips. That's right, you can do it at home. There was an article about this just last week in the New York Post. I'm not going to show you the viral video, but you can look it up on your own later and see for yourself if you would like to go that route. But advances in IVF and artificial insemination have helped fuel the gay boom as well. That's been on the increase since the 1980s, helping to make parenthood a reality for lesbian women and gay men. In fact, Anderson Cooper and his 2 children are currently on the cover of People magazine, and he talked openly about his surrogacy journey to fatherhood. So these connections just kept appearing to me as I'm doing this reading. I don't know if you've ever heard of the gay boom. That's new to me, by the way. We are in the middle of a gay boom, so gay parents are increasingly becoming parents. I was also most struck by the timing of this research over the past year as the Supreme Court eroded women's choices about pregnancy by overturning the 1973 Roe v. Wade decision in the Dobbs case. Abortion has been a touchstone in the struggle for bodily autonomy for women, and we have seen tragic consequences of the recent Dobbs decision already. At the same time that this case happened, the story of Jane has made its way into the spotlight in a variety of ways. This summer, I was actually gifted the book in the middle, Looking for Jane, a historical fiction about a girl who was forced to go to a home for unwed mothers and give up her baby for adoption against her will in Canada. This trauma then motivated her to become a doctor, and she joined the Jane Network, which was an illegal abortion network. So she became an illegal abortionist in the 1970s and 1980s in Canada, in Ontario. The Jane Network also inspired both a motion picture called Jane on the left there, starring Elizabeth Banks and Sigourney Weaver, and as well as an HBO documentary on the right here. And I thought it would maybe help set the stage for us if we take a quick peek at.
We were ordinary women trying to save women's lives, but we were criminals. We were felons. For most of the nation in 72, abortion was illegal.
We had to go underground.
The woman would be given the address to the front.
It was probably obvious to neighbors what was going on.
We came to the service from other things, the anti-war movement, the civil rights movement.
You couldn't not pay attention to what was going on.
Fetal death is murder.
You could not work as a pregnant woman. If you weren't married, you were out of luck.
They were terrible situations.
The septic abortion ward was full every day.
Women did awful things. They were literally dying because they were women. So we thought we can be of use. I said, we could use my phone, but change it so that they don't ask for Eleanor. How about Jane? Nobody's called Jane anymore.
We had the phone numbers on bulletin boards around Chicago. Pregnant, call Jane.
The clientele included daughters, wives, mistresses of police, state's attorney, judges.
It dawned on me how big an issue this was.
Jane was an outrageous undertaking by a lot of smart women.
I was not there to pass judgment.
I knew there were women like me.
Under the radar of the Chicago Mafia and police department.
We were all being watched. The phone rings. A man says, we know where you are.
There were 11 counts of conspiracy to commit abortion. 110 years for each of us. So that's a long time. That might have ended Jane right then and there.
I couldn't see myself sitting on the sidelines.
We were building a new world, one woman at a time.
Sometimes you have to stand up to legitimate authority, and sometimes there are unjust laws that need to be challenged.
It's a really good documentary if you haven't seen it. The movie was also good. But I just kept thinking to myself as I'm watching this unfold and delving into this idea of Bachelor Mothers, will we need to bring back the Janes? Are we going to see a resurgence of the Janes in our lifetime? So these connections keep coming up, and I had to limit what I started, trying to research because all these little threads were pulling me in all these directions. And so one of the areas that I had started to think about last summer was this concept of bachelorhood, right? These women are called bachelor mothers, and this idea of what is a bachelor, why this term, what does it mean, what are the connotations, kept pulling me back in. And so last year, if you saw my presentation, you would know that I really talked about the idea of bachelorhood as an empowering thing. But it's actually a little bit more complicated than that. And even though last year I found out that Bachelor Mothers embraced this title because being a bachelor evoked ideas of independence and freedom, whereas the alternative term spinster had evolved into a term that emphasized a woman's failure at womanhood, like she wasn't a wife and she wasn't a mother. The more I dug into the explanation, the more I began to notice the complexities, and apparently bachelor has a more sinister connotation, and a bachelor man's freedom is connected to, as it says here in the quote, licentious behavior and a failure at manhood. Bachelors were often considered immature and unhelpful to their families. Conversely, in medieval times, a spinster, there on the left, an actual spinster, was a job title. It didn't have the negative connotation of old age, loneliness, lack of desirability, and possibly the possession of lots of cats. Apparently that is the description of the word spinster for many people now. That wasn't the case in the Middle Ages. Instead, spinster was simply the word used to refer to the woman who spun the wool to prepare thread for weavers to use. She was an independent person who had an income. So spinster was a badge of honor at that point. But by the 20th century, we know that spinster had morphed into a name saved for women who were unmarriageable and seemingly pathetic. They failed at womanhood. As an example, one author, Mildred, recounted her life as a spinster in 1951 in this way. She says, "I went upstairs to my flat to eat a melancholy lunch, a dried up scrap of cheese, a few lettuce leaves, for which I could not be bothered to make any dressing, a tomato, and a piece of bread and butter, followed by a cup of coffee. A woman's meal, I thought, with no suggestion of brandy afterwards." When I read that description of her dinner, all I could think about was girl dinner. And you are all, what is girl dinner? Girl dinner is everything and nothing all at once. Basically, this is a new trend. Single women have been sharing their easy, no prep meals, like cheese and crackers, a handful of nuts, and some carrots, on social media. Why would this be controversial? Well, apparently there's a lot of backlash by wives and mothers who seem to be enraged, or maybe they're just jealous, that part of their burden as caretakers is to prepare healthy cooked meals for their families. They don't feel they can get away with just serving a platter of random items to their families. While Mildred felt bereft and pathetic, having to eat cheese and bread, modern single women have idealized the freedom from domesticity that they escaped by foregoing marriage. Who knew girl dinner was going to show up in this? Not me. The fact remains, though, that our society continues to normalize marriage and motherhood for most women, and it continues to see motherhood as only normal within marriage, despite the fact that numerous studies have highlighted that the biggest negative impact on children is childhood poverty. Because so many single mother-headed families fall into that category, the public often views the absence of the father as the primary cause. A 2017 study, however, looked at the long-term effects of single parenthood on kids, and as you can see there, it found that it had nearly no impact on their general life satisfaction. The authors also found no evidence, quote, supporting the widely held notion from popular science that boys are more affected than girls by the absence of their fathers. What mattered most in terms of thriving, they concluded, was the quality and strength of relationships between children and parents. As we see from the graph on the right, however, a recent Pew poll has found that nearly half of Americans still say now that single women on their own raising children is bad for society. The main conclusions that my research has drawn so far include the two following. One, bachelor mothers, those women in the 1960s who defied conventions and chose to become mothers alone, occupied space where the intersection of social and economic transitions of the mid-20th century allowed for experimentation for some women. Two, as part of the history of motherhood, understanding bachelor mothers helps bridge the gap between strictly controlling women's bodies in the post-World War II years and the flowering of freedoms during the feminist movement. Bachelor motherhood can be seen as a precursor to late 20th century trends in solo parenting. So what I wanted to talk a little bit about today were two categories to introduce to you to think about Black motherhood and lesbian motherhood. And so analyzing the place of bachelor mothers in the larger picture of single motherhood in the 20th century requires us to take into consideration more than just white middle-class heterosexual mothers who identified as bachelor mothers. Expanding the view to include lesbian and or Black mothers, because there are Black lesbian mothers, will give us an idea of what kinds of challenges are structural, which social and policy changes might address those problems, and how differences in groups affect the lives of these families. We know that obstacles have existed for all groups in the recent past. Famously, during the Reagan era, Black single mothers were vilified in the press, and the term welfare queen came to represent all Black unmarried mothers. Quote, between the fall of 1974 and the presidential election of 1980, this newspaper, the Chicago Tribune, used the phrase welfare queen in more than 80 different stories. Sometimes it was bold and large in a headline, sometimes it was tucked into copy. Sometimes it was welfare queen in quotes, sometimes just welfare queen, capitalized, without any colloquial smirk, as if it were a formal title in Chicago. White single mothers came under fire when the television character Murphy Brown became unexpectedly pregnant and decided to raise her baby alone. The furor spilled over into the 1992 presidential campaign, and on May 19th, Vice President Dan Quayle gave a speech to the conservative Commonwealth Club of California in which he blamed the Los Angeles riots on the breakdown of the American family and family values and said, quote, it doesn't help matters when primetime TV has Murphy Brown, a character who supposedly epitomizes today's intelligent, highly paid professional woman, mocking the importance of fathers by bearing a child alone and calling it just another lifestyle choice. And finally, we know that many lesbian mothers face criticism from both within their own communities, from feminists, and from the general public as well. Being gay and being a mother were incompatible for many. Quote, it felt like my desire to be a mother, especially a young one, I first tried getting pregnant at 21, flew in the face of feminism, and most of my LGBT, she didn't have a Q yet, peers considered themselves feminist. Where were the bold choices I was supposed to be making to escape domestic life? It felt nearly impossible to be both queer and a single mother by choice. None of us shaved-headed, pink motorcycle jacket-wearing, third pronoun-using queers were expected to check the box homemaker or join a PTA. And so I thought I would share with you an excerpt from the writing that I focused more on these two types of mothers to add to the conversation. So this is just a very brief, well, kind of brief excerpt. You can stop me if it just gets too long, just cut me off. This article makes the argument that the short-lived phenomenon of the bachelor mother is in fact a veritable missing link in the history of single mothers. As we have already established during the 20th century, white women slowly gained political, economic, and social freedoms, creating the opportunity for independence. However, despite many gains, the social construction of motherhood is only viable during marriage, and the stigma against unmarried mothers continued throughout the century. Sociologists have established that having a spoilt identity hinges on what is deemed socially desirable at a particular time and place, rather than a person's attributes. For example, while being divorced has become more socially acceptable, making the decision to be a single mother by choice continues to bring about negative responses. Quote, researchers have determined that negative views about single motherhood tend to stem from a conviction that there is something inherently wrong or damaged about a single mother as a person. Notably, descriptions of single moms given by the study's respondents included the beliefs that this group of parents was neglectful, irresponsible, immature, stressed out, depressed, prone to making bad choices, promiscuous, hopeless, and/or insecure. Single fathers, on the other hand, were perceived by those surveys as individuals in a challenging situation who had to worry about complications of solo parenting, like paying child support, finding childcare, and balancing their dating life with raising kids, end quote. Instead of seeing challenges for single mothers as part of a larger structural problem to be solved by employers, governments, and other social organizations, single mothers are seen as having particular personal attributes which cause the problem. Regardless of race, ethnicity, sexual orientation, or economic situation, single mothers face this personal assessment. Adding in other difficulties only reaffirms the critics' derision. While spinsters and bachelor mothers morphed into independent feminist women, the same fate did not await the single mother. Given the obstacles set up in the public mind, as well as the very real trouble for single mothers in finding childcare, housing, and work as unmarried mothers, it is interesting to assess how bachelor motherhood emerged. Bachelor motherhood emerged during a critical period of social and economic flux. Throughout the 1960s, women continued to push against the confines of the restrictive laws regarding motherhood. They were needed as workers in a Cold War economy designed to defeat the Russians, and so white middle-class mothers joined their working class and black sisters by entering and remaining the workforce despite cultural norms idealizing them as stay-at-home mothers. As historian Alice Kessler Harris describes, quote, with children safely off in school and suburban households sustained by labor-saving appliances, the extra income and involvement of wage work seemed attractive. Many of these women had also read The Feminine Mystique by Betty Friedan, published in 1963, and were inspired by the book's message of balancing domestic work with paid labor outside the home. Additionally, the birth control pill was made available to the public by prescription and primarily to married women in 1960. The ability to control one's fertility and engage in family planning was a game changer. It allowed married women to join the workforce at younger ages, providing them with a level of financial independence from their husbands. The National Organization for Women, NOW, was formed in 1966 and started to work dismantling the system of sex-segregated jobs. Male-wanted and female-wanted job ads were finally made illegal in 1968 by the newly created EEOC, Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. In 1970, California had enacted the nation's first no-fault divorce laws, resulting in a huge increase of single mothers. Quote, the number of single parents went from 3.8 million in 1970 to 6.9 million in 1980, and approximately 90% of those were mothers. Bachelor motherhood emerged in the crucible of the 60s, where many revolutions were brewing. As we think about the paths that unmarried mothers have traversed in the past century, we must take into account the ways in which race and sexual orientation have contributed to the public imagination concerning single mothers, as well as the very real challenges to the social order which helped introduce change. Black and/or lesbian mothers undeniably faced even greater disadvantages than their white bachelor mother counterparts. The contributions of these groups, as they navigated their own sets of problems, needs to be added to the story of bachelor motherhood to understand the nuanced and complex ways that society has shifted in order to make space for new family dynamics and organizations. Despite the fact that the increase in bachelor mothers upset what many viewed as the natural order of things, remember the Bachelor Motherhood League in London that felt the need to solve the problem of 20,000 spinsters? We still couldn't find out anything about them, by the way. They're just a mystery. In many ways, their whiteness and middle-class status protected them. By the end of the 60s, white women had begun to chip away at social norms in other areas, such as increases in college attendance by women, giving them more confidence to test the limits. Lesbians and black women often faced radically different opportunities than white women. In the 60s, homosexuality was still illegal in much of the United States, providing no protection for women wanting to have families. Similarly, though the civil rights movement had been somewhat successful over the course of the 50s and 60s at bringing about marked political changes, social and economic conditions tended to dictate the reality for many black single mothers. By viewing these stories through a lens of bachelor motherhood, we can see how needs of all solo parents, including single fathers, are more similar than not. In fact, the kinds of problems faced by bachelor mothers of every persuasion continue today to be similar to the issues facing single parent-headed households. Access to childcare, maternity and paternity leave, affordable housing, work-life balance, and support for the primary caregiver. Until about 20 to 30 years ago, the idea of lesbian mothers was an oxymoron. Women were either mothers or they were lesbians, but they were rarely, if ever, both. And by not being mothers, lesbians were seen as essentially not women. Therefore, after the gay rights movement in the 1970s, when more lesbians began to embrace motherhood on their own terms, many outsiders continued to see them as unfit. But it was not just outsiders who criticized lesbian mothers. Within the queer community, before the gay boom of the 1980s, many lesbian feminist periodicals tended to symbolize the family. It symbolized the family as the hegemonic force of heterosexuality. Having children was literally giving in to the man. Like poor women, women of color, unmarried women, and young women, lesbians were not only excluded from the mandate of motherhood, that was reserved for heterosexual married women and nuclear families, but popular beliefs and public policy actively worked against them at attaining this exalted status. Adoption was not a legal option for lesbians in all 50 states until 2016. And though natural insemination was a possible route to motherhood, it had its own complications, from finding a willing partner, navigating the nuts and bolts of that, to deciding about co-parenting. This option remained less than ideal for many lesbians, as you can imagine. Nevertheless, two trends in the 1980s helped make lesbian motherhood more conceivable. the establishment of single mothers by choice, and the growth in medical fields related to fertility. Not all lesbian mothers are bachelor mothers. However, because gay marriage was only made legal in all 50 states in 2015, for much of the recent past, lesbian mothers were often considered single parents, whether or not they had a domestic partner. But they have one crucial similarity with bachelor mothers of the 60s, and that is motherhood for them is a conscious choice. One lesbian woman, Sarah, explained, quote, biologically, I think, well, I have a couple of good heterosexual friends that got pregnant by accident, and because of same-sex sex, you don't have to worry about that. Because lesbians do not generally have sexual intercourse with men, they have very little chance of getting pregnant by accident. Both lesbians and unmarried heterosexual women had in common that they might become mothers by choice, and in 1981, a new organization gave a moniker to women who were unpartnered and choosing to parent alone. Single Mothers by Choice, SMC, they call themselves. Probably the most popular of the organization, and it is still in operation, their website boasts, quote, over 30,000 thinkers, triers, and mothers have enjoyed the benefits of membership. Legally, during that time period, lesbian mothers would have fallen into the category of single mother by the government, employers, health insurance companies, and adoption agencies alike. Whether or not they had a domestic partner, lesbian mothers often faced the same challenges as bachelor mothers. They had to decide if they could afford to become mothers, first of all. In vitro fertilization and artificial insemination were and continue to be extremely expensive and might require more than one attempt. Adoption is also very costly when agencies allowing same-sex or single mothers to adopt is even possible. Additionally, lesbian mothers, like bachelor mothers, must decide if the cost of maternity is within their budgets. Can they afford to take time off work to have a baby? Does their employer have family-friendly policies, or will they need to leave work after the baby is born? Bachelor mothers and lesbian mothers also face choices in how their parenting situation might impact their children. Some women wondered, quote, whether it is better for children to have mothers who stay at home or who have occupations. While some lesbian mothers may have the added anxiety about possible negative public attitudes of families with same-sex parents. And yet, even with all the barriers facing unmarried mothers, the overwhelming majority of both bachelor mothers and lesbian mothers reported that, quote, although the day-to-day demands are relentless, they were continually surprised by the many rewards and depth of feeling they experienced once they became mothers. Satisfaction in the decision to become mothers seems to be the major common factor among women who identified as single mothers by choice. Regardless of race, sexuality, or socioeconomic status, it was the freedom to choose motherhood on their own terms that created the most favorable situation for families. As we have seen in our attempt to investigate multiple lenses through which solo motherhood can be attained, it is difficult to view any situation through just one category. Not all lesbian mothers are unpartnered, and not all lesbian mothers are white. But their commonalities with bachelor mothers helps us understand better the social and economic challenges faced by single mothers and how many of those obstacles were tackled over decades. By adding in the perspective of Black single mothers, both heterosexual and lesbian, we gain further insights into the ways in which factors such as the workplace, government agencies, social situations, and religion place pressures on Black women in some similar ways. Additionally, like the rampant homophobia of the mid-20th century and how it negatively impacted lesbians, white supremacy and racism against Black citizens created unique challenges around which Black single mothers had to create family. One of the most problematic consequences remains that, quote, misconceptions about African American single mothers and the family are insidious and deeply entrenched. They are stereotyped as inferior, non-productive, and dysfunctional for themselves and society. All of these have become codified into law and created a legal system that, quote, perpetuates the derogatory position of the Black woman and hence places increased obstacles in the way of her raising her children in a single-parent forum. For example, the way the law defines and treats illegitimates. That's the legal definition of children born out of wedlock. Again, we come full circle to the idea that motherhood is only legitimate inside of marriage, and any deviation from that social norm is just that, deviant and unacceptable. We started out this investigation trying to understand how bachelor motherhood fits into the story of women in the 20th century. We saw how bachelor girls went from spinsters to new women to it girls. With ever-increasing political, economic, and social freedoms, won from gains made both in the first and second wave of feminism, bachelor mothers morphed into single mothers by choice, and then, hopefully, just into mothers. The story of real-life Murphy Brown news anchor Liz Walker highlights some of this progress. Quote, in the summer of 1987, the media reported a public controversy following the announcement of Liz Walker, an evening news anchor for WBZ-TV in Boston, that she was unmarried and deliberately pregnant because she was in her 30s and had decided it was time to start a family. Declining to state whether the pregnancy was planned, Ms. Walker said that it was a purely personal matter, but that she had made the announcement before the pregnancy became visible and questions were raised. She commented, I'm 36. I finished my education. I've been working for the last 15 years. I've had to work hard to get where I am. Walker, who is black, was castigated by some reporters and columnists as being among those who thumb their noses at the old social and moral conventions. However, the director of The Big Sister, where Ms. Walker serves on the advisory board, refused to repudiate her as a role model for young girls. He said, our agency deals with girls and women and the choices that women make with as much awareness as possible of the options and consequences. She has made a difficult choice. End quote. Officials at Liz Walker's TV station offered full support and they shrugged off all the criticisms. All of the mail that came in to the news station was 90% in her favor. Choice. That was the word that made all the difference. She has made a difficult choice. Ultimately, that is what Bachelor Motherhood is really about. Women having the independence to choose motherhood and not be crippled by unfair economic, political, or social constraints. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much for that. That was really, really special. Thank you. I'm Jacob Hazard. I'm the Dean of Faculty, and it's my responsibility to see that faculty members are aware of the Bennett Writing Grant opportunity. There's information about the grant available here tonight, and I will send out a reminder with information about the application process later this year. Now, it is a pleasure to acknowledge our second reader, World Language teacher Audrey Bourriaud, AP French right here. Tonight, Audrey marks her debut as a first-year Bennett Grant recipient and reader. Audrey is a member of our residential faculty who is beginning her third year as a teacher of French as well as our international programs coordinator. Through her powerful writing and advocacy for storytelling within her classroom, and her upcoming exploration of the intersections of agriculture and literature, Audrey continues to foster an environment where passion for learning and the love of the written word can thrive. She dedicated her summer work to poetry, to editing her book, 10 Love Stories from Paris and Somewhere Else, which will be published in France next month. Congratulations. And finally, she worked on her new novel entitled Vice Versa, a story that explores the effects of climate change and the threats to biodiversity through the eyes of Pom, a young Congolese girl. As part of her summer research, Audrey took a 2-week permaculture class in Hamilton, Ontario, to learn about the proper techniques for this regenerative type of agriculture, an important theme of the story. Her dedication to teaching and her creative approach echo Elizabeth Bennett's legacy. So, it is a pleasure to welcome our next Bennett Grant recipient, Audrey Bourriaud.
Thank you so much for being here tonight. It is my first time reading some of my work to a large audience, and I appreciate your coming. You make this day extra special for me and Dr. Ryan. I would like to warmly thank the members of the Bennett Grant Committee for the support they are lending to us and have been lending to others throughout the years. It is very comforting to know that literature is valued in general and at Cranbrook particularly. Tonight, I will read 4 short pieces, all connected by the love for nature. The first one is the beginning of a short story to be published next month in France with Prémédite Publisher in a collection entitled, as you said, Jacob, 10 Stories of Love from Paris and Somewhere Else, 10 histoires d'amour de Paris et d'ailleurs. The second and third are poems about the wildlife we have on our beautiful campus and the challenges our modern lifestyle impose on it. Finally, the last piece is an excerpt from the novel Vice Versa that I'm working on. Before I start reading, I would like to apologize for my imperfect pronunciation, which may make a few words hard to understand. The Valley of the She-Wolves. Quote, "A bee goes from flower to flower gathering honey, and without knowing it, fertilizes her whole meadow." François-René de Chateaubriand, 18th century writer, French. Quote, "We no longer knew if the women's revolution had happened." Annie Ernaux, French writer who won the Nobel Prize, the Literature Nobel Prize last year. It's the most charming place to escape the concrete jungle on a Sunday. The slope on the hill is unnoticeable, and there is just one small meadow that, with its basin shape, deserves to be called a valley. The arboretum, once the Crew Nursery, unfolds over 13 acres. The natural life of the park never sleeps, but at daybreak, a different activity follows the hazards of the night. Those rustlings fade away, making way for the bird's song, surprisingly expanded in the special soundbox of the dawn. This month of September, an enclosure is filled with black sheep, born in the spring and summer, all of different ages and sizes, and which you can hear bleating mournfully through the morning mist. Bees, on waking, clumsily brush past trunks and stems, all starched in their pollen garb and also over-anxious to return to the hive and seal up every cell with cappings as the season calls for. But what they don't know yet is that the head beekeeper is coming this evening with his abusive bee blower for honey collection. The gardeners, half asleep, tread on the damp grass, prune a bush, consider a flower bed. They take special care of the weeping blue cedar, foremost of its kind, frightening in the uncertainty of the fog, like a slaughtered titan, gradually regaining a tree shape as the sun warms the earth and the water evaporates. At 10 o'clock, the caretakers remove the padlocks. Then, families from Châtenay disseminate, set out on walks. They love this environment, so good for children. They snack or have a meal. They meander, and stroller wheels stick to the sand on the path with soft squeaks. Silhouettes have fun steering under the cover of the cedar, like in a house exposed to the four winds. Among the tapered bottle brushes of peacock blue branches that droop from 100-year-old exhaustion, a couple sneaks up to a sign. Did you know that was an Atlas cedar? Yeah, but what I didn't know was the story of mutation. Do you think that it's weeping because it's sad it was taken from Atlas? Don't be ridiculous, Noor, my love. Adrienne clasps her wife at the waist, kisses her gray and black hair, and makes her continue walking. I speak as an uprooted woman. And I really regret I didn't include more pages of this beginning, Dr. Ryan, because this couple was talking about adoption. See? Like there is, just like, yeah. Here is the first poem. I do not wish to disappoint the birds who genuinely perch on a feeder beside my balcony. I do notice the black seeds of their pupils distorted by hunger, instinct, feverish big greed, recklessly going for a golden grain. I do not wish to disappoint in them the famished godsend, the pitiable wretch whose domains were seized willy-nilly, the indigent fool who still believes in me, though their little people have been killed, aphids, ants, beetles, gnats, roly-polies, flies, worms, by my phytosanitary culture. How could I disappoint their confident curs in mid-air and forego their feigned peevishness? Oh, such characters. I have failed them on everything else. So come rain or shine, wind or snow, I replenish the tube made of plastic, often with a note on the wire mesh. Hey jay, finch, pecker, plover, dove, sparrow, please don't be mad when I forget. I do not mean to be a pain. Too late, I know, but can't one hope? I wish you peace and a good meal. All I ask is you keep ravishing me. With love, a devoted fellow. The second poem. I've noticed a squirrel severely squished on the concrete, its body all suddenly and utterly flattened forevermore. A goat skin with no goat in it, no one in it, just a hide with some hair that a glorious aquarium once wore casually before it atomized into slim hair. How fur and flesh can become so thin, so nothing, I have no idea. We sure don't give a nut about Cyridae, their little tiny hearts beating in their little chests, like a scared prey, like a hunted, or simply like a guest who shows up without a bouquet, like a heady pounding sound in my bloody ear, derisory to all, except the ones who hear. At least the car killer didn't pretend they cared. Straightforward their felony was, and yes, they went, straight, like society usually prefers it goes. We easily leave for dead on the side of roads, deers, raccoons, opossums, shrews, groundhogs, toads, coyotes, chipmunks, voles. Once I've seen an eagle smashed, but its gigantic gullible wingspan brandished towards the skies and frantically flapping to each wind-sucking car, indifferently passing, the rest of it volatilized into thin ground or into the tar. It made me think of that Nike of Samothrace, no face. Its sole identity exploding in a pair of oversized outlandish wings, ding-a-ling, ding-a-ling. Interesting how diligent we are erecting ramparts and bulwarks everywhere with locks. Would have been better setting up roadblocks for critters' sake, just saying. Look around. Land fragmentation, dams, cuts, large-scale striations, tracks, highways, freeways, railways, lines, compartmentalization, not a spare square yard, even in the boondocks, and always grid on grid, tone on tone, social fractionalization. Hey, this is my property, no trespassing. But you can pass away. You will be run over if you dare stay. Like was that, what was it? Rodent? That rodent, yes. That unutterable gem. Why? When did we make it a us versus a them? The last text comes from the dystopian novel I started to write this summer, but thought about for almost a decade. The storyline depicts the collapse of biodiversity and the climate crisis through the eyes of Pom, a Congolan, and I'm insisting on Congolan, she's not Congolese, she's Congolan, little girl. Her Congolan fathers, Ogumbe and Matabi, and her best friend, Vice. As Pom grows up, Ogumbe encourages her to discover the world they live in, allowing the reader to discover the oddness of it, since it's a dystopia. When Pom meets Vice in college, the two girls decide to move to Europe, the poorest continent on Earth. to start a permaculture farm, and I learned a lot this summer about permaculture thanks to the grant that I received. And they work towards a revitalization of soils, people's hurts and hopes in a society that flirts with chaos. In this turmoil, groups of people try their best to heal the psychological wounds that the desperation of a livable world causes. A type of therapy is developed, which consists of leading the listeners through what used to be. Some natural world, some natural piece of forest or meadow. And let them experience peace for a little while. These are called immersive imagination workshops in the book. And this is what I will read to you tonight, as if you were yourself a character in the novel. It's going to be a participative piece. If you do not wish to close your eyes when I prompt you to, it's perfectly fine. We are going to walk through a forest. And this forest is going to be a little bit magic. Maybe it's not a forest that you have seen before. Maybe there will be rubies in lieu of purple flowering raspberries. Maybe there will be sapphires in lieu of blueberries. Maybe there will be velvety garments in lieu of sumac blooming trees. Maybe a chanterelle will be a delicate cup of honey. You shall see. Only you can tell what is in this forest that will grow within your inner self. Let's begin. Your eyes are closed and you wake up from a long dream you've had in a meadow. The sun shines over you and you feel its warmth on the bare skin of your arms, your cheeks, your forehead, your scalp. Maybe there is grass caressing your neck, and you notice the soil on your back, holding you like a nest, like a cradle, as if you were a treasure. You are fully awake, fully alive, fully aligned with the lightness of air, the smells, the humming of leaves, the liveliness of a bird trill, and you decide to stand up and walk barefoot in the nearby forest. Here is the first plant you see. What is it? Is it a root gently asleep? An extravagant mushroom? Is it a sprout? A shrub? A trunk that leads your eye to the canopy? Look at this plant for real, for itself, for what it is. Decide in yourself who is this leafy friend visiting you, and slowly let its curves and curls and colors carve and chisel radiant happiness in you. Can you feel this inner bloom happening at the core of your chest? Foster it dearly and pass part of this blossom onto the plant which initiated it. Then to the next tree. Then to the forest entirely. The forest, loaded with a peace that makes you feel cherished. A peace that sunbeams and songs of living beings reshape to make it a bliss, along with a holistic breeze. Bowls start moving, and the fruits they bear here and there gleam. Is your plant waving with them, or does it twitch? You notice something near it. Maybe a fairy, maybe an insect, maybe a mammal, a bird, or a phoenix. Choose what you want this animal to be and look at it closely. Look at it interact with your plant. Is it smelling it, ecstatic? And you see their twinkly snout, their antennas softly palpating. Is it energetic, doing fearless acrobatics on the verge of a sprig? Is it falling asleep under a leaf? Is it chewing the leaf? For a moment, feel what this animal feels. Be it. And experience the plant the way the animal experiences it. The creature leaves, and you're left in a wind blowing on your palms, your wrists, your arms, your neck, your chin, your cheeks, your eyelids that it seamlessly lifts, and you come back here. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was such a rare treat. I was sitting there remarking on how one of our readers, we got to really experience them in their specialty, right? Go deep and speak at length in their area that they were familiar with, and then we got to see a faculty member reveal a side of themselves that I think we don't get to see very often. What a also different but very special treat that is. Thank you both so much. This was really wonderful. So we're going to close tonight's Bennett reading with the inscription from the 1959 Kingswood Yearbook, which was dedicated to Miss Bennett by her students with this inscription. Miss Bennett, you've illuminated for us the great realm of literature from Moses to Mogum. Our confused syntax and the confusing imagery of the modern poets have become clear under your teaching. Even when engulfed by book reports, critical papers, and clarion proofs, you always have an encouraging word or a bracing comment for us. To obey your dictum, be specific. It is to you, Miss Bennett, that with love and respect, we dedicate our woodwinds. And so we today dedicate this night of reading to Miss Bennett and to all of her teachers and mentors who inspire us with their willingness to share their passions and talents. Thank you all for being part of this evening and celebration with our two talented writers. Thank you all so much for coming.